Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Hey, thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast and our live Astros-Tigers post-game show and sort of the post-mortem for the Astros season, unfortunately. If you're new to the show, we're part of the National Believe Network, and joining me is my co-host, Stephen Kerr, 65 plus years in sports journalism between the two of us. And Stephen, this is kind of a fitting end to this season, the way it all came about. We'll get into the details, but this is kind of what it's been like all year.
Unfortunately, yes, Robert. I mean, this is just how I have felt for, well, practically the whole season. I mean, it just kind of epitomizes what the Astros season was like. I mean, they started out with probably one of the worst starts the club has ever had, 7-19. Then they turn it on. In the last 3 months of the season, they're definitely one of the hottest teams. But even then, you just felt beneath the surface that something wasn't quite right and that the run was going to end. And there are times I'd like to be wrong, Robert. I really, there are times I don't mind being proven wrong. And this is one of those times. And unfortunately, it just didn't happen. And hey, look, Detroit came to play. You got to congratulate them. They haven't been in the playoffs since 2014. And wouldn't you know, it's AJ Hinch who brings them back and gets them a win in a series. It's just like he did with the Astros when he came aboard, and then in 2015 team and so on and so forth. So a twisted irony fitting end to the Astros season, I guess.
Yeah, congratulations to AJ. I mean, he did a fantastic job with the Detroit Tigers, and they were so well coached and managed during this series and, of course, all year long. And they were on fire coming into the playoffs, and we've seen it over and over again, Stephen. The hottest teams typically do pretty well come playoff time.
Well, that's why, despite the fact of, Detroit coming in as a wild card team, that's really why I was a little apprehensive even about this series, Robert. I didn't feel the Astros could get very deep in the playoffs. That I was pretty set on that. I thought that they could still handle the Tigers in this wild card series, but a lot of things would have to go right, and they just didn't. But no, it really isn't that surprising with the Tigers. I think in their last 78 games, they were 48-30. They started off the season slow, but they sure finished strong. And as you said, it's usually the hottest team that gets in the playoffs that does pretty well.
Sometimes in sports, you just have to tip your cap to the guys across the way because, they played a great series and did everything right. And the Astros just couldn't get out of their own way. And for everybody watching live, what do you guys think? Send us your questions and comments. We'll post your reactions as we move along. And if you're new to Houston Sports Talk, make us a part of your routine. We've been doing Astros live post games for the last 3 years, going back to the World Series championship team in 22. We've been doing Astros post game non-live going back, boy, I don't know, Stephen. I think it's since they've been doing playoff appearances in the last few years.
I know when I joined the show in 2019, and I know we did them then. I can't remember. I'm sure you did it in the 2017 World Series team.
Yeah, no question. And I think it's ever since at least the 2017. I don't know if we did the 2015, but ever since 2017, you can go look in our archives. YouTube, there's a one with just the championship, the last game. It's there. It's on YouTube. And then, of course, definitely on YouTube, if you go into the library, you'll find our celebration after Game 6 of the World Series in 2022. And maybe you would rather watch that than other stuff that we're going to be talking about in this one. But let's get to the key moments in this one. Top two, this was a biggie. Altuve, terrible error, should have ended the inning. Luckily, Hunter gets out of it, but it forces him, this is key, it forces him to throw to two more batters, make several more pitches. And I'm going to get to that and why that's important later. But bottom two, Bregman singles, Pena walks. And with two out, Jason Hayward narrowly misses two doubles down the right field line after having that super hard line out to first base in his last at bat in game one. So this could have easily been 2-0 right there. And said, Stephen, Hayward strikes out, and the old it's a game of inches. That's what happened.
Yeah, you talk about hard luck for Jason Hayward, and Alex Bregman. He had some hard outs today too. And going back to Brown, the one thing it did affect the pitch count, most certainly, Robert. But what I did like about Hunter Brown is, unlike Fromber on Tuesday, Hunter didn't allow the trouble to overtake him. And, even later on, and when the home run, and I know we'll get to that, but when Hunter got himself into some trouble or had some adversity, he came back. I mean, he certainly is not the reason that the Astros lost today, at least certainly not the main reason. So that's the one thing I will say is he just came back and kept trying to make good pitches as best he could. But yeah, that second inning was big because it did run up his pitch count. He did pitch into the sixth inning, but he might have gotten through that inning if it hadn't been for that error.
The Astros have found an ace pitcher. Sorry, Fromber, you're not doing it in the playoffs. Hunter Brown is doing it. And Stephen, what is it, 3 or 4 more years that they've got Hunter on the cheap? So that's a big deal moving forward.
Oh, it is a big deal. And the team is going to address pitching during the offseason, but that's one player, one pitcher that you don't have to worry about right now as long as he can stay healthy. And, we did have some questions about Hunter Brown coming into the season. Even when it started, he was shaky. But when he started tinkering with some additional pitches, I think that's really what changed it for him. And sometimes that's just what you have to do, Robert, is you go back to the drawing board and you work on your arsenal. You make some adjustments to your arsenal. Make some adjustments to the league, because by golly, the league is going to make some adjustments for you.
His control also was masterful the last few months of the season too. And that plays a huge part. It's much better than we saw last year for sure. So Hunter Brown is a big deal moving forward. I know it's a tough loss, but it's a big deal. Bottom 3, Jordan, weak grounder after a Tucker walk ends that opportunity. Bottom 4, Yanner singles, Caratini's hit by a pitch, but Pena hits into a double play. Just a gentle reminder of why he bunted in game 1, guys, if you had an issue with it. So bottom 5, Tigers bobble a double play, but Tuck strikes out with Chaz on second. And just, this is it, Stephen. This is the series. Tons of missed opportunities by the Astros.
Well, the difference really, Robert, is when the Tigers had the bases loaded, they capitalized. When the Astros had the bases loaded, or when they had runners on, both Tuesday and Wednesday, games 1 and 2, they just didn't come through. And that was, those were more opportunities that they could have had. Let's be honest, the Astros had plenty of chances to win this series, win both of these games, or at the very least, tie the series and send it to a game 3. The Tigers capitalized. The Astros just did not.
Let's go to the top of the 6th, and Hunter gives up what I will call a Will Harris type cheap down the line solo home run.
Yeah, I heard the Howie Kendrick references, believe me.
Oh yeah, you heard it. So yeah, and he gets pulled after a 2-out walk. So basically, that Altuve era, Stephen, led to Hunter not going a full 6 innings, and Abreu also had to come in an inning early, which that not maybe a big deal, but it's just something. And Stephen, Hunter did his job. He was excellent.
Yeah, like I said, you can't blame Hunter. I mean, he came out and pitched. He had a lot of pressure on his shoulders. He's still a young pitcher. He had a lot of pressure, though. He's pitching against his hometown team. The series is literally in the balance, but he came through. It's just, some of the other members of the club and the bullpen did not hold up.
Bottom 6, after Jordan gets on, Yanner hits into a double play. Astros not putting hits together. And at this point, they had 1 extra base hit in the series. And guess what? I think they ended up with 1 extra base hit in the series. And by the way, ESPN's gotten so cheap that for a couple of innings, they used 2 tin cans and a piece of string for audio, Stephen. I don't know if you heard any of that.
I did not. I didn't catch. I was, for part of the game, Robert, I was in and out doing some things for my job as editor of the Hockey News, one of the sites that I edit there. So I may have missed that part of it, but another reminder about ESPN. We won't get into that though, of just why there's such a disappointing excuse for a media network.
Yeah, exactly. So bottom 7, Astros load the bases on the Caratini hit by pitch. Pena the bloop single. Beautiful Dubon bunt single on 2 strikes. Singleton hits the grounder to first, but Jake Rogers can't make the one-hop grab at home plate. Astros get lucky. That scores 1. Altuve hits a weak pop fly down the right field line. But, Steven, Jeremy Pena is still very fast. Gutsy base running, great slide.
Boy, you talk about some heads up, and, it could have been a disaster if he had been thrown out. And that ball was not hit very deep, by the way. Yeah, I think I'd forgotten just how fast Jeremy is. And he does a picture-perfect head-first slide to get that run. Man, it's like you were holding your breath the whole way with that one, Robert.
No doubt about it. So, unfortunately, Kyle Tucker has a double play that ends the inning. And I've got thoughts on Tucker in just a second. And we'll also get into an amazing run coming to a close for the Astros. But before we roll on, quick reminder to share your thoughts on YouTube. Click the like button to support the show. And if you haven't done so, subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. That way you can listen to us on the run as well. All right, Stephen. Kyle Tucker is Biggio Bagwell in the postseason. Do you want to throw the 200 or 300 mil at Tuck for that? I don't.
No, I just don't. You've got to show me consistently for at least a couple years, longer if you can, that you're going to be money, pun intended, in the regular season and the postseason, because it's fine to get to the postseason. But once you get there, you want to go beyond the first series. I mean, the Astros have been in 7 straight ALCSs. Well, no more. And part of the reason is because guys like Kyle Tucker did not come through when you really needed them to. And, granted, Bagwell and Biggio, they didn't have a lot of World Series to appear in, but they certainly had some postseasons to appear in. And the same thing happened there.
What would be your guess as to Kyle Tucker's OPS in the postseason prior to this game? I've got the numbers prior to this one.
His OPS, I'd put it about, 450, 500?
No, I'm talking about for his career.
Oh, for his career. In the postseason?
Yeah.
Well, it's low. I know that much.
Yeah, no, it's 691. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, that sounds right. That's what I was saying. I was saying about 500, somewhere in there.
Yeah, well, 500, no, this isn't Maldonado type numbers, but no, 690 is
691. It still could be better though.
Yeah, we're in sort of the Jake Myers range, I guess you would call it. But that's why I'm not super upset if he goes at this point. You would love to keep him if you just had all the money in the world and you could just throw all the money in the world, but you don't. You work on a budget, and I wouldn't be sad if Kyle Tucker walked after next year. You keep him through the year. I'm not one of those ones that wants to trade him. I'd rather, make another run with Kyle Tucker. I know you might not get anything for him, but it's still really helpful to try to get into the playoffs next year with hopefully a healthy Kyle Tucker.
Hopefully. Well, I mean, I have also said in the past though, Robert, is that you don't want to keep these guys walking away with virtually nothing. I mean, if you can get something, but that's the problem is when you have a rental player, you're not going to get a lot for, even for a Kyle Tucker. You still have a little time. I mean, if he comes out like gangbusters next year, you can think about it. But, as we've seen with spending all the money you spent at the back end of the bullpen and how it imploded, then you have to think twice about something like giving Kyle Tucker the kind of money that he's going to want. The same as Alex Bregman, actually.
Yeah, every time they've given some big money out in recent years, it's not done the job. And look, we're going to talk about another guy that's not done the job, that's got some big money. Top 8, Ryan Presley does what he's been doing all year. Back of the baseball card, Presley is over, Stephen. But on the wild pitch, Yanner's still got a block home plate right there. That's something that, it's just the little things that Yanner's got to do defensively, and that's got to be better if he wants to be the regular catcher. If not, you got to think about, okay, what can we do? Can we put Yanner at first base? What's the future for him?
Well, that pitch was a slider, and look, if you know that you're calling a slider, then you need to be in position knowing that you may have to block it if you're not sure where it's going to go. So, it's not like Yanner didn't know what the pitch was. He certainly did. It was a slider, and yeah, it was definitely, it was wild, but he could have been ready to back it up and to block it. So, yeah, it's just totally unfortunate how that happens. And Robert, you've expressed your trepidation about Presley, and I have too, for much of the season, and with good reason. And I mean, I think we'll certainly get into this, if not on this show, later on through the offseason. But I think you've seen Ryan Presley pitch his last game in an Astros uniform.
Yeah, I have something on Presley in just a second. I mean, I'm not saying that was the difference, Yonner not blocking it, because obviously we know what happened after that, but it's just those little things that help you win in the playoffs. And the Astros have had guys that have done those little things over the years, and that's why they have won in the playoffs. So Hader comes in, and the Tigers throw the dagger 3-run double at the Astros. So, Stephen, all that money the Astros threw at Josh Hader, but Josh didn't tell us he can't get outs if it's not a save situation.
Well, let me ask you this, Robert, because I thought about this before. Why did you feel like you had to burn both Presley and Hader before the 9th inning? Where was Hector Neris in one of those situations? I know he was warming up with Kikuchi, I think in the 8th inning or close to the 9th inning. Well, why not put Neris in earlier and at least try to spare one of those two guys for later if you could catch up? I mean, it's a moot point now, but it just made me wonder.
Well, my issue is just that Ryan Presley stinks, and you can't use him, and that's, that makes you handcuffed in the bullpen, and that's been the issue all year. He's not any good anymore.
Well, that's my point. Why couldn't you have just put Neris in and say for Presley, if you had to use him, you use him?
I don't know if they think Neris is better at this point. I mean, he hasn't pitched lights out he's pitched better, a little bit better than he did with the Cubs, but he hasn't exactly pitched lights out. So, I think they believe that Presley is still one of their top 3 guys. He's not their second best guy, though, and I just disagree with them on that. They brought Abreu in, and he gets brought in before Presley, and I don't know why, except they needed him because of the Altuve era to come in at the end of an inning, and now you don't want to bring in Presley the way he's come in, and he always gives up a hit or a walk, or somebody gets on immediately with him every single time. And he's not a guy you can just bring in the middle innings, because that's how poor he's been this year.
Yeah, that's certainly true. But that's why I think, maybe you could have even put Neris in place of Hunter Brown and then pushed everybody back. Maybe things would have turned out differently. Maybe they hadn't, but we'll never know.
All right. So now I'm just going to tell you what I think about Ryan Presley going forward. He's got this vesting option that has kicked in for $14 million next year. And Stephen, just flat out, I would trade him for a minor leaguer in the offseason. The most that you can get for him, which I don't know if it's much on $14 million. I don't know if somebody would be willing to give you anything decent for Ryan Presley, but you definitely want to just get him out of here so you can use that money somewhere else, whatever. In free agency, maybe it's $14 million you can spend on Kikuchi instead.
Yeah, it's hard to argue that, obviously, because, I just felt coming in, and especially once the season started and it was apparent that Presley was not the Presley that we become used to, whether it's the whole mental thing with getting Josh Hader, whatever it is, he's not the same pitcher. And, he was due for a down year, Robert. I mean, he's done so well the last few years that it was kind of like you almost expected him to have a regression to the mean. But I think with so many other needs the Astros have, I think that's at least an option they have to explore.
Yeah, I would love to somehow get Montero out, but I don't know if you can, because a
lot of money tied up there too.
Yeah, you DFA'd him. If you could, I would give up even, not a great prospect, but I would give up, sort of a mediocre prospect to get off the Montero money. But I don't think you can do that at this point. Obviously, they're brave. So you've already got $30 million next year, Stephen. That's just you've thrown in the trash can between those two guys. So get Abreu off, so it's not $44 million you're throwing in the trash can next year.
Yeah. That's what I would say. I mean, this is one of many question marks that the Astros are going to have during the offseason of not only how they're going to address the roster, but how are they going to do it in a cap-friendly way?
Any other moments?
Not a cap, but a tax, the luxury tax and that kind of thing.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to ask you, is there any other moments from this game for you that you wanted to highlight?
Well, that was basically it. I just felt like, even just coming into game 2, you just had this feeling that this was the Tigers' day. This was the Tigers' series. And, with the exception of, late in the game today, they really came to play. I mean, he almost thought like they were going to throw it away, but they didn't quite. The bats got it together. And it's just, I don't know, it's kind of eerie to know that AJ Hinch is moving on and the Astros are not.
No comments from anybody? Nobody excited to talk about the future for the Astros? Stephen, I just got to do something real quick here, and we got to tip our cap. It's been an incredible Astros run. This is a spoiled fan base, I have to say. They've got no memory of what it's like for most baseball fan bases. The 7 straight LCS run is over. They've gone to the playoffs 9 of the last 10 years. When I was 25 years old, the Astros had a total of 2 playoff appearances and 0 playoff series wins. Those 2 playoff losses weren't just any playoff losses. They were gut-wrenching. 2 of the most gut-wrenching games in baseball playoff history. This Astros team got 0 starts from Luis Garcia, Lance McCullers, and Jose Urquidy. They got 28 starts from Christian Javier, JP France, and Justin Verlander. 6 starting pitchers basically gave you next to nothing this year. Verlander, when he did start, wasn't good. Kyle Tucker missed 3 months. He was an MVP candidate that missed 3 months right in the middle of the season. Chas McCormick was terrible. Presley, Hader, and Abreu had below par years. I mean, it's just an amazing thing that this franchise has done, especially with all the hits and all the losses that they've taken over the years, and to keep coming back and keep coming back and keep coming back like a great fighter. Stephen, do you have any context for this?
Well, Robert, it is amazing how quickly we get spoiled on winning, but I started following the Astros when you got used to not winning. I started following in the early 70s. I think it was 72 is the first year I remember. So I had to wait 8 years before they even made the playoffs. Although they came close a couple of times and they had some, fair seasons, but they didn't make the playoffs until 1980. And then you saw these heartbreaking losses that you were talking about. So for someone like me, Robert, and even you can look back and you do remember what it was like to be in that situation. Well, now you get used to 7 years in a row that you get to the ALCS. It kind of goes back to what I said a little while ago, Robert, about Presley and about certain other players. There's just going to be a regression to the mean. It's just you're bound to get caught up with at some point. Other teams are going to get better. Other players are going to get better and things aren't going to fall the way that they normally have for you from year to year. I mean, my gosh, all the injuries the Astros have had, nobody's going to feel sorry for them because this is unfortunately a baseball-wide thing. There are other teams that had the same problem, but you have to have the depth and you just have to have that next man up mentality. Some teams did, some teams didn't. And the Astros, for a good while, were able to step up. Even in the World Series years, they had some adversities. But this year just wasn't one of those years, Robert. And as disappointing and sad as it is, in a way, it really shouldn't be too surprising because all runs are bound to end sometime. And I'm not saying that the run is completely over. They could bounce back next year and have a much better season, or they could start declining even more.
Let me ask you this, because Brandy says, discuss the future of the Astros in regards to next year. And we'll definitely be talking more about that.
We'll do that plenty in the next few weeks. That's for sure.
But I do want to ask you because Jeremy Pena, outside of that bloop single, didn't look great in the playoffs again. Hasn't looked good the last 2 regular seasons as a hitter. His Gold Glove a couple of years ago was all right, but I don't know if he's been all that great. I mean, he makes the spectacular a lot of times, but he's also made quite a few errors in the last year. So my question to you is, Stephen, do you need to start considering another shortstop to improve that spot? in the lineup and improve things. Maybe even you could find somebody better defensively, or, it's 3 years into Jeremy Pena. Do you want to keep rolling with him? Relatively cheap, I guess, for the next 3 years because of arbitration.
Well, I think that's the key, is that he is going to be cheap for the next 3 years. But, you can always look at, you've got a guy, another infielder that you could possibly eventually think about moving into that spot, or Alex Bregman's spot, and that's Bryce Matthews. He's had quite a year in the minor leagues. Now, can he cut it in the majors? We don't know yet. But I think it's something that you eventually have to look at. I don't think you're not going to replace Pena next season. I don't see that at all. But maybe 2 years down the road, if he continues just to decline in certain areas. His hitting was better to some degree this year, but the defense is definitely a concern. And then if you do lose Alex Bregman, you're going to have to replace that defensively too. And, the way Shea Whitcomb looked at third base and how shaky he was with the big club, you can't be confident that you've got an option with him there. So there are some definite question marks about the Astros infield, not just with Jeremy Pena, but you got to think about, what are you going to do about Bregman if he does indeed walk, which I think is a very strong possibility that he will.
Yeah, and if you look at the option at third base, it's not just Shea Whitcomb. It could be Zach DeCenzo. It could be Bryce Matthews. Bryce Matthews is already in AAA this year. First round pick. They're super high on him. You would assume he's pretty good at third base, or will be pretty good at third base pretty quickly, because he was a shortstop coming up. So that's an option. And what are you going to do at first base? Caratini played so well at first base this year. And the fact is that you could flip him and Yanner playing first base and give those two guys breaks between, one and the other. And there's such good bats in the lineup, Stephen, that maybe that's an option next year. And having Salazar permanently on the roster is sort of the third catcher in case you need him.
Yeah, and not only that, the Astros drafted a catcher as their top pick this year, who is still a ways away, but it is looking mighty good too. So he may pan out in a few years, and it's something that you can think about. So I loved having Caratini and Yanner Diaz bats both in the lineup at the same time. But yeah, you've got to figure out the catching in that regard, especially if you're talking about a backup to Diaz.
Yeah, there's some starting pitching issues. If Kikuchi walks, you assume Verlander walks, and you can't depend on any of these guys that were injured coming back anytime soon. We know we can't depend on Lance McCullers. That's a given. Luis Garcia, who knows? It won't be till the middle of the year or longer before a Christian Javier could return, or a Jose Urquidy could return. So, yeah, they have some major question marks going into the offseason, besides Alex Bregman, besides first base, besides center field, which I think has to be addressed this offseason as well. And unless they are that confident in Jacob Melton. So, yeah, Steven, there's just, we got a lot to get into this offseason, but, I just feel like it's good problems to have, because they made it to the playoffs again, and they've still got guys coming back that you trust and that are really good, guys like Jordan and Altuve, and these starting pitchers are good.
Yeah, and you know what? This is where the general managers make their big bucks. These are question marks you and I can sit and agonize over and worry over, and I'm sure Dana Brown has his anxious moments. I'm not saying that, but this is where he gets to shine. He gets to answer all these questions, and he hasn't done anything yet that I would say, I don't have complete trust in Dana Brown that he can answer all of those questions, or at least most of them. I don't know that you're going to, as many as we've come up with, I'm not sure you can address them all in one shot, but you can at least give it a try. And certainly the biggest areas, pitching, first base, and, then some of the others can certainly fall in line.
Yeah, come back to us as the offseason moves on. Me and Steven will do our regular show midweek. Of course, Texans content is going to be coming at you fast and heavy, as well as the Rockets content. Thanks so much for joining us once again. Before we close, also want to remind you one more time, look for my show in just a couple of hours. I will be talking with the guy as Houston Stresson about Texans stuff. We're hitting on the Texans' disappointing pass rush, what Stroud wants to change about the offense, and if Kenyon Green is a first-round bust. And it's already in the can. So I'm telling you, it's good stuff from Houston Stressens, otherwise known as Garrett Williams. Thanks so much, guys, for joining us all through the baseball season. But hey, we do this 24/7, and there's a reason why we're Houston Sports Talk. It's not just one team like a lot of these shows, because that way it's always fun, no matter what time of year. There's something going on. Houston Cougars basketball is just around the corner too.
Yeah, bring it on.
All sorts of stuff. But thanks again, Stephen, and we'll talk to everybody in a few days. And of course, like I said, look for that show coming up just in a few hours.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.